So hi everyone. Today's session is the final session for the Commercial Law Trust unit, and it's Unit 7, and it's the assignment discussion session. Before I go on to the assignment discussion session, I'll give you a quick summary of what we did in the 4 learning outcomes, and then we'll go into the assignment discussion. So the first learning outcome we did was learning outcome one, which was to understand the basic principles of equity as part of English law system. And in this learning outcome one, we looked at the modern trust drafting, principles of nature of equity, trust tax, estate planning, types of trust, beneficiaries and trustees' duties. So we looked at things like, analysing firstly 1.1, the mechanics of creating an express trust, including the rights of beneficiaries. So we looked at the intention, the certainty of subject matter and certainty of objects, and certainty of trust purpose and the formalities. We looked at also transfer of legal titles, so how the legal ownership of trust can be transferred to trustees, and we looked at complying with statutory regulations, like the law, why it needs to be complied with for taxation purposes. We then went on to look in learning outcome at the rights of beneficiaries and why they were so important. So the right to trust property, the right to information, the right to enforce the trust, the right to inspect legal documents, and the right to sue. We also looked at the right to benefit for beneficiaries as well, irrespective of any sort of interest defined. We then went on to look at 1.2, which was to understand the functions of a trust device. And we looked at the functions of a trust device in regards to asset management, which is one of the main primary functions. We looked at asset protection, estate planning, privacy and confidentiality, tax planning, charitable giving, and succession planning and for businesses and special needs planning. We then went on to look at 1.3, which is to evaluate and compare types of trusts. And in this, we looked at all the types of trusts in examples, and also looked at the evaluation and comparison between the trusts. So the first one we looked at was bare trusts. We then went on to look at interest in possession trusts with the comparison evaluation. We went on to look at discretionary trusts, accumulation trusts, and mixed trusts with the comparison and evaluation, and settler interested trusts, non-resident trusts, and we looked at the evaluation and comparison for all these trusts. We then went on to 1.4, which we looked at evaluating the nature of respective rights and obligation of the parties. So we looked at the settler's rights and obligations, how the settler retains the right to establish the trust and defines its term. We looked at the trustees' rights and obligations, and we looked at the beneficiaries' rights and obligation. And then we also looked at things like other parties, such as protectors, who can oversee the trustees' actions, and advisors such as, it could be accountants, lawyers, financial advisors. We then went on to look at the nature of respective rights and obligations, and also ended learning outcome 1 there. We then went on to look at learning outcome 2 in regards to commercial law trust, and we looked at learning outcome 2, which was to understand the way that trusts are used in commercial transactions and how issues are dealt with according to the norms of contract and trust law. The indicative content here was to look at commercial uses of trust, contract law and trust law, trust implied by law, so resulting in constructive trusts, contract law terms and their interpretations, trustee contract of appointment, liabilities and breach, equitable remedies. We looked at provision in the contract of appointment, exclude liability for a range of defaults, pension trusts and bonds. So we looked at 2.1, which was to analyse the context of commercial transaction into contract with trust law and equity. We looked at contract law in commercial transactions. So we looked at the importance of formation of contracts, Commercial transactions typically begin with the formation of contract between parties, and then contract law governs the creation and interpretation and enforcement of these agreements. We looked at the importance of terms of contracts. We also looked at what would happen if there was a breach of contract. We then looked at trust law in commercial transactions, and here we looked at the use of trust structures, so how trusts are often utilised in commercial transactions to manage assets for the benefits of the beneficiary. We also went to look at fiduciary duties and enforcement duties for trust law. We then went on to look at equity in commercial transactions and looked at the supplementation of law, how equity operates alongside contract and trust law. We looked at equitable remedies and the doctrine of estoppel. We then went on to 2.2, which we looked at evaluating the interactions between contract law and trust law. And we looked at the formation of trusts. We looked at express trusts and how they can be created, and implied trusts as well, and gave examples. We looked at fiduciary duties, enforceability of trust arrangements. We also looked at the modification of trust terms, remedies for breach, and then went on to look at 2.3, which was looking at how trusts are not bound up by contract. And we looked at the equitable doctrine and the principles of equity in regards to contract law. We looked at trust creation, and we also looked at the parties that are involved in this contractual relationship, the enforceability, nature of obligations. And then we went on to look at 2.4, which looked at the critically analysing how trustees limit their liabilities. And in regards to limiting their liabilities and mitigating any sort of risks and potential liabilities, we looked at trust deed provisions. We looked at exclusion of liability clauses. We looked at insurance. We also looked at appointment of professional trustees. And we looked at delegation of duty. We also looked at acting within authority, so how they would act in the scope of their authority and in accordance with the terms of the trust. We looked at regular review and monitoring, and we looked at seeking court approval to protect themselves from potential liabilities. So this was learning outcome 2. We then went on to learning outcome 3, which was to understand the differences between the rights and duties and powers of trustees operating commercial trust as opposed to those operating family trusts. So we looked at the 3.1, which was to evaluate the powers of a trustee operating a commercial trust and one operating a family trust. And we looked at investment powers, so how if trustees often have broad investment powers. We also looked at business management. The contractual powers have trustees of commercial trusts may have the authority to enter into like contracts and agreements on behalf of the trust. We also went on to look at discretionary distributions. So commercial trusts may have discretionary distribution to income, distribute any sort of income or anything. We looked at risk management. We then went on to look at the powers of a trustee operating a family trust. So we went through commercial, now family trust. So we looked at asset management of that, how they are responsible for managing trust assets for the benefit of family members and other beneficiaries. We looked at estate planning, dispute resolution and family support. We then went on to look at education and advancement in regards to family trusts. We looked at 3.2, which was to compare and contrast the rights and duties imposed upon a trustee of a commercial trust or family trust. We looked at the rights, investment powers, We looked at management authority, contractual powers. We looked at the duties such as fiduciary duties, prudent management, compliance obligations. We then went on to look at family trust trustees and looked at their rights for distribution discretion, asset management, and decision-making authority. We also looked at duties, which are fiduciary duties, beneficiary consideration, confidentiality, and privacy. And we looked at the importance of trustees of commercial trusts and family trusts and how they have similar fiduciary duties and to act in the best interest of the beneficiaries, and the rights and duties may differ on the nature of the trust. So that was learning outcome 3. We then went on to look at learning outcome 4, which was the final learning outcome, which was to look at understanding the relationship between the law of trust in an international setting. So we looked at US law relating to trust creditors, trust assets, creditors' rights, and corporate trustee. We went on to look at 4.1, which was to analyse commercial expectations of a trust creditor. So we looked at things like we looked at different considerations of the expectations of a trust creditor in understanding the requirements of creditors. We looked at the repayment assurance, where trust creditors typically expect assurances regarding the repayment of debts or fulfillment of any obligations. We looked at transparency and disclosure and how trust creditors expect transparency and disclosure regarding the trust's financial status, assets, liabilities, and any sort of cash flow. We also looked at enforceable rights. So this is where trust creditors expect enforceable rights to recover debts or seek remedies in the event of a default. And also looked at the contractual provisions, security interests, or legal remedies. We also looked at priority and ranking. So trust creditors consider their priority and ranking in the event of insolvency or liquidation, and how they can assess the hierarchy of creditors and the likelihood of recovery, debts of other creditors, such as secured creditors, unsecured creditors, or beneficiaries. We looked at risk assessments, and then contractual terms and regulatory compliance, communication and relationship management. Trust creditors have value open communication and effective relationship management with trustees and trust administrators. We looked at risk mitigation strategies, and we looked at legal protections. So trust creditors rely on legal protection. We then went on to look at 4.2, which is to compare the law relating to trust creditors in other jurisdictions. We looked at the United States and how the US trust creditor law vary state by state, as trust law is primarily governed by the state, statutes and common law principles. We looked at the Uniform Trust Code, UTC, which provides a model framework for trusts across the states. We looked at UK, which is the trust creditor laws in UK are primarily governed by the Trustee Act 1925. We then went on to look at the Insolvency Act in regards to the UK, which actually provides specific provisions for creditor rights in cases of trust, insolvency, or any cases of bankruptcy. We then looked at Canada as well, where the trust creditor laws vary again by province, and as trust law is governed by the provincial statutes and common law principles. And within Canada, they have the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, which provides specific provisions regarding creditor rights in cases of trust insolvency or bankruptcy. So we looked in regards to how within Canada, how creditors may enforce their rights against trust assets. We looked at Australia in regards to creditor laws in Australia and how they're governed by the state and territory legislation, as well as common law principles derived from English trust law. And within Australia, they've got the Corporations Act 2001, which provides specific provisions regarding creditors' rights in cases of trust insolvency or corporate trustee bankruptcy. We then went on to look at offshore financial centres and how they are often a favourable trust creditor laws to attract trust businesses, including robust asset protection. We looked at offshore jurisdictions and how they may vary in different countries. We then went on to look at the civil law jurisdictions and why they are so important in regards to countries such as France, Germany, or Japan, where trust creditor laws may differ significantly from common law jurisdictions. And that was the final thing for learning outcome 4. So now we're going to go on to looking at the assignment discussion in regards to that. The assignment brief is also available on Moodle for you in regards to that, and we'll go through a lot of the assignment brief I've put onto the assignment discussion, but you can get the brief online as well. So just going on to the assignment discussion, it's for Unit 7, Commercial Law Trust. So the unit aim is to explore the law of trusts in an international context, comparing doctrine in different jurisdictions and exploring the theoretical implications of such differences. So what information needs to go onto the assignment? So this is at the start of the assignment. So when you're doing the assignment, you start off doing the assignment, you need to have your name on, you need to have your registration number, and you need to have your unit level, which is in this case level 7, commercial law trust. You need to have your assignment declaration as well, and that identifies that you are declaring your assignment as being authentic and that you understand that the definition and penalties of cheating, collusion and plagiarism are set out in the OTHM policy. So it's really important that you sign that declaration to confirm that it's your own work and that you know the policy of OTHM and that you follow that policy and you acknowledge that the work that you've submitted will meet the guidelines of this and it is your own work. So this declaration is really important in regards to submitting this with your assignment. You'll then go on to looking at the start of the assignment. So here you'll need a table of contents. The font size here is 1.5, line spacing, page numbers to be inserted, and an introduction. Make sure that you are putting all the assessment criteria in the headings, and this will reiterate throughout the presentation. You will see that it is telling you that you need to make sure that if you are doing task 1, part 1 of task 1, you need to put that as a heading and then right under that heading. This is so that the person marking it is able to understand that you've completed every assessment criteria within the learning outcome. So the learning outcomes, firstly, the 4 learning outcomes that we've gone through briefly in regards to what we've done in each session, firstly was to understand the basic principles of equity as part of English system of law. Secondly, to understand the way trusts are used in commercial transactions and how issues are dealt with according to the norms of contract law and trust law. Thirdly, to understand the differences between the rights, duties and powers of trustees operating commercial trusts as opposed to those of operating family trusts. Number 4 is to understand the relationship between the law of trust in an international setting. So now we're going to go on to the tasks and the assignment brief, okay? So let's go back. So the task 1, there's 3 tasks. So task 1 is unit learning outcomes 1 and 3 to be used to complete task 1. So to complete this task 1, you need to use learning outcome 1 and unit outcome 3 to help you complete all elements of task 1. So learning outcome, as we mentioned earlier, is to understand the basic principles of equity as part of English law system of law. And then learning outcome 3 is to understand the differences between the rights, duties and powers of trustees operating commercial trusts as opposed to those operating family trusts. Assignment brief and guidance, task 1 of 3. So firstly, you need to produce a report which focuses on how the mechanisms of trust started to be used in a commercial setting and how it differs from a family law trust. So here you're looking at the comparison, okay? To assist you with this task, research the cases. So you need to make sure you know the cases RIC against Hashmi and Hashmi 2002, EWCA CIV 981 2002, and Swift Advances PLC against Anjum Ahmed and Parveen Ahmed 2015, EWHC 3265, Chapter 165. So this is your task, what you need to do, okay? You must ensure, so there's 6 parts of task 1. Firstly, you must ensure the report looks at number 1, it analyzes the mechanics of creating express trust, including the rights of beneficiaries. Number 2, indicates an understanding of the functions of a trust device. Number 3, evaluates and compares trusts, types of trusts. And number 4, evaluates the nature of respective rights and obligations of the parties' trusts. Number 5, evaluates the powers of a trustee operating a commercial trust and one operating a family trust. And number 6, compares and contrasts the rights and duties imposed upon a trustee of a commercial trust or family trust. So there's 6 parts to task 1, okay? You need to make sure that when you are doing each part, you use the correct wording that is there to identify that you've completed each part and put that as a heading. Now, these learning outcome, to complete this, you would need to look at learning outcome 1 and learning outcome 3, okay, to complete these tasks. So there's 6 parts of task 1 that you need to complete. Delivery and submission. The submission is in the form of a report written in Word format. So make sure you are using Word format. The recommended word limit is 1,200 words, excluding diagrams, references, and appendices, and learners are expected to adhere to the word count. A 10% leeway either side of this range is permitted before the assessor is instructed to stop. So you need to make sure you do not go over the 10% leeway, because then the marker will stop and they won't mark your work, okay? So they need to, you need to adhere to the word count. Make sure it is 1,200 and then 10% leeway. Where you could find the information for task 1. Task assessment criteria to be covered is 1.1, learning outcome 1, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, and then learning outcome 3, 3.1, 3.2. We will look at an example in task 1 where it asks you. So we're going to take an example from task 1. So one of the elements of that part, which is number 3, and we're going to look at giving you an example. So the example we're taking is evaluate and compare trusts of types of trusts. So we're going to use that as an example, and we're going to go through that. So where to find the information for task 1? So for this task that we've got, which is to evaluate and compare trusts, you will need to go to learning outcome 1, and you need to look at page 19 onwards, which looks at the different types of trusts and will help you complete the answer. You need to make sure that you also use other resources, not just the PowerPoint slides to help you, okay? So you need to look for this answer at what bare trusts are. You need to look at interest in possession trusts. You need to look at discretionary trusts. You need to look at accumulation trusts. You need to look at mixed trusts, settlers, interested trusts, non-resident trusts, okay? So you will be looking at the comparison evaluation for all these trusts for this question, and you need to make sure that you're mentioned as the question is to evaluate and compare. So you need to read the question, what the question is asking you, and it's asking you to evaluate and compare. You need to make sure that when you are doing each part of this question, that you are meeting the learning outcomes and the word count. So you've got 6 parts there in task 1 of 3. You need to make sure that it's within 1,200 words. 1,200 words completes that with a 10% leeway of the 10% leeway. Okay. Then, you need to make sure that you are covering all the elements. Make sure there are headings. Make sure there are, in regards to when you've put it in the contents page, that you've completed them. to make sure that you have completed them. Also, to help you with this, the tasks, make sure you're referring to the two cases, which is RAC again and Hashim, and Swift Advances. So then we'll go on to learning outcome 2, and the task 2. Task 2 of 3. In this task 2, it's learning outcome 2 that you are using to complete this task. You need to look at understanding the way trusts are in commercial transactions and how issues are dealt with according to the norms of contract law and trust law. So the assignment brief and guidance for task 2 of 3 are in this one. So you need to write an essay which considers the equitable devices used to take security in commercial contracts, with a particular focus on the analysis of quist clause, trusts, and taking security in loan contracts. In this part of the assignment, task 2, you must ensure the essay includes 7 points here. Make sure each point is a heading, and then you are writing under each point. The first one is to indicate an understanding of the function of a trust device. The second one is to evaluate and compare types of trusts. The third one is to evaluate the nature of respective rights and obligations of parties' trusts. Fourthly, to analyse the context of commercial transaction into contract with trust law and equity. Fifthly, you need to evaluate the interactions between contract law and trust law. And sixth, explain how trusts are not bound up with contract. And 7, critically analyses how trustees limit their liabilities. For all these tasks, the word limit is 1,600 words. Okay, so the submission again is the form of a report written in Word format. It needs to all be done in Word. The recommended word limit is 1,600 words, excluding any sort of diagrams, references, and appendices. Learners are expected to adhere to the word count, and a 10% leeway is either side of this range is permitted before the assessor is instructed to stop reading any further. So for task 2, it's 1,600 words. Where to find the information for task 2 of 3? So task 2 assessment criteria to be covered is learning outcome 2, 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and 2.4. And it clearly identifies that's where you'll find the information. Unit learning outcome 2 to be used to complete task 2. So here we've used an example of one of these parts of the task 2. We've taken a question out to help you as an example. So the question we've taken out is evaluate the interactions between contract law and trust law. For this task, you will need to go to learning outcome 2. You need to look at page 12 onwards to page 16 onwards, which looks at evaluating the interactions between contract law and trust law, and will help you complete the answer. So this will help you complete. You need to make sure you use other sources too. For this answer, which is to evaluate the interactions between contract and trust law, you need to look at the following. Firstly, the interaction between contract law and trust law, the formation of trusts, express trusts, implied trusts, fiduciary duties, enforceability of trust arrangements, modification of trust terms, and remedies for breach. So this will answer the question in evaluating the interactions between contract law and trust law, and you will need to look at learning outcome 2, pages 12 onwards. So the last and the final one is task 3 of 3. Unit learning outcome 4 to be used in completing task 3. So to understand the relationship between the law of trust in an international setting. So the assignment brief and guidance is task 3. This is for task 3 of 3 tasks. Produce a legal memo using an appropriate convention which considers whether a commercial trust can successfully be protected against its creditors. You must ensure the memo uses, so there's 2 parts to task 3. analyzes the commercial expectations of a trust creditor. And number 2 is compares the law relating to trust creditors in other jurisdictions. You must include recent case law in your memo. So you must look at up-to-date case law and you must look at using that. For the delivery and submission in regards to task 3, it needs to be, again, in Word format, as we mentioned earlier. It needs the recommended word limit for task 3 is 1,200 words, excluding any diagrams, references, and appendices. And learners are, again, expected to adhere to the word count, and there is a 10% leeway either side of this range to be permitted before the assessor is instructed to stop reading any further. So make sure you are sticking, again, I will reiterate this, to the word count. So where you'd find the information for task 3 of 3, task assessment criteria is learning outcome 4, 4.1 and 4.2. That's where you'd find the information to complete task 3. The unit learning outcome is 4 to be used to complete task 3. And again, for this task, like I've done for task 1 and 2, I've taken an example for you that we could look at and where you'd find the information. So the example we've taken is to analyse commercial expectations of a trust creditor. For this part, you would be looking at learning outcome 4, page 6 onwards to page 12, which looks at analysing commercial expectations of a trust creditor and will help you complete the assignment. Again, you need to make sure you are looking at other sources too. Here you will look at repayment assurance, transparency and disclosure, enforceable rights, priority and ranking, risk assessment, contractual terms, regulatory compliance, communication and relationship management, risk mitigation strategies, and legal protections. You need to make sure, again, for all the tasks, you follow the learning outcomes and you follow the assessment criteria, but also the word count. Okay, that is for all the tasks. You need to make sure at the end of the assignment, you need to make sure you do a conclusion towards each part or towards the end. You need a reference list and a bibliography, which is really important in regards to what sources you've used, and it needs to be in chronological order. So in regards to, just to know, I've provided you with an example of each of the tasks for each of the tasks in each task that's submitted. So task 1, 2, and 3, I've taken a part out and given you an example and identified where you can find the information to complete them. You will need to do that for all the tasks, and also you will need to do additional reading to evaluate and support your answers. As this is a level 7 unit, so you need to be looking at evaluating and analysing, okay? And make sure you are adhering to the word count and to the requirements and of OTHM. Referencing for all tasks, you should use and cite a range of case law, academic and reliable sources. As we've listed at the end of each of our learning outcomes, there's some good sources you can refer to and additional reading on Moodle. A comprehensive Harvard referencing list must be included at the end of your work. And the system we use, the reference system, is the Harvard system of referencing. Learners must show a knowledge and understanding of the subject area. You must provide references to relevant case law or legislation wherever appropriate. And you must also be able to support answers and show evidence of wider reading appropriately. You need to make sure you are adhering to this and make sure you are sticking to the regulations and make sure you are referencing things properly, because you have signed a declaration to confirm that this is all your own work. And you don't want to be going down the road of having any issues of plagiarism, collusion, any sort of. So make sure you reference everything you use in your assignment. So a summary of what needs to be considered when doing the assignment. Firstly, make sure you start with an introduction and then end with the conclusion for each task. Make sure you are using Harvard system for referencing. And you can refer to online sites that may help you, such as Neil's Toolbox, which is a good site that you could use. And there's other sites, Cite Me on Harvard referencing. If you're using diagrams, please make sure you reference them accordingly. And make sure you have a bibliography reference list and its alphabetical order. Try to use examples when explaining certain concepts, for example, when looking at theories, etc. Make sure you are using assessment criteria AC as a heading for each part of the task. For example, if you are looking at task 1 and looking at AC 1.1, make sure each part of the task should be done as a heading and answered under that heading. The wording must be the same as the one on the feedback sheet and the assignment sheet. You cannot change the wording. Do not change the wording yourself. You need to make sure it correlates with the feedback sheet. You need to be referring to the indicative content all the time and checking the word count. Use some useful tips. Read the tasks carefully again. Focus on the details. Focus on command verbs. Broadly, just a guidance. I suggest that for action, command verbs, you can cover the task by writing them, explain, define, describe, assess, examine, clarify, analyze, compare, contrast, critically evaluate, and the word counts are just there. Harvard referencing, again, reiterating this again, referencing needs to be Harvard, i.e. author, date, style. For example, Slack, Johnston, Brandon Jones, 2011 in text. In the reference towards the end, it comes as shown as the full reference. Word limits, again, adhere to your word limits. Give proper headings and subheadings. Make sure document looks presentable and professional. And word limits start from 3,500 plus 10% leeway. Plagiarism or tolerance, similarity must be 20%. Make sure you are adhering to the recommendations on there. Okay, preliminarily, you need to make sure you are not copying and pasting work as plagiarism and would lead, as I mentioned earlier, to academic misconduct or collusion. And you have signed the declaration, and I reiterate this again and again. Make sure you reference all your sources. Make sure you check your grammar and spelling, because that's really important. Make sure you refer to ebooks and journals or Moodles for this unit. And if you have any issues or any questions around this unit, make sure you email learnerwork@ukvarsity.co.uk. Submission of the assignment must be done on learnerwork@ukvarsity.co.uk. And assignment submission is after 2 weeks of completion of the unit and its delivery. So the unit has now been completed. Okay, so you've completed learning outcome 1, 2, 3, and 4. You need to make sure you are now on with the assignment and looking at the assignment brief also, which I'll just show you because it is on Moodle for you to refer to. Most of it is in the assignment discussion, but the assignment brief I'll show you is on Moodle for you to refer to if you need to print it out. You will have access to all the slides and all the resources on Moodle, so I'll just show you the assignment brief. I'll just share the assignment brief with you. So this is the assignment brief and this is how it looks. And it analyzes, it tells you everything in regards to what is needed and then the assignment brief at the bottom. So the unit reference number, the unit title is there, the unit level, number of credits, guided learning hours, sector, and the grading is there as well. So you would either get a pass or a refer. And it tells you the unit aims, the learning outcomes, which will help you in using them as headings as well. So 1.1 would be to answer that bit, and then you would be covering all the elements of that. So you've covered all that once the criteria is followed. And learning outcome 2 and learning outcome 3 to look at that. Then it starts off with the tasks. So it tells you what you need to do, which I've done on the assignment discussion slides for you. It identifies where you need to make sure that you read around the cases. So make sure in task 1, again, I'll reiterate again that you look at the case law RIC and Hashmi and Swift advances. So it goes through each task of what is expected. So the task 1 is the 6 elements that you need to look at there. In regards to completing the task. Task 2 is looking at the 7 elements. Make sure they are all as headings, so you have covered each element, and make sure you are adhering to the word count. So it is 1200 for that, 1600 for that, which is 2800. And then for the final task, I think it's 1200, which is 4000 for level 7. So, you need to make sure you are adhering to that. And this is for task 3 is 2 elements of task 3, which is 1200 words. So 600 words for each one, just an example. So analyze commercial law, expectations of trust, or compare the law related to trust jurisdiction. So this is also available on Moodle for you, and it looks at it's the assignment brief. The slides will be available on Moodle for you that we've just gone through. Make sure you are taking on board all the elements that I've covered, declaration, plagiarism, Harvard referencing, word count. Make sure all that is taken into account when you are completing this assignment, as it's really important that you stick to the requirements of OTHM in completing this assignment. So now we've finished this assignment discussion. You've finished the commercial trust law unit, and now please get on with the assignment. Thank you for attending today's session. Thank you. And if you have any questions or anything, please email learnerwork@ukvarsity.co.uk. Thank you for attending the sessions.